Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Healthy Business Podcast. I am joined by the wonderful Anna Schild, and we're going to be talking about content repurposing, which I know is something that lots of people, or content is something that people find overwhelming. So we want to make it super simple for you and share some really great tips on how you can repurpose in a way that feels good for you. So Anna, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. Like we were just saying before, a lot of people are confused just in general when it comes to content. So I'm happy to shed some light onto how it can be, a little bit easier for some business owners out there.
Yeah, because it is one of those things, isn't it? That, we all need content. We've all got to be visible within our businesses. We can have the best product and services, but if no one knows about us, then no one's going to buy from us. So it is the lifeblood of our business to be able to bring those sales in. We've got to be out there. So one question that I ask everybody normally at the beginning of these episodes is what a healthy business means to you. And I'd love your take on this.
Yeah, so I feel like kind of two different things. One, I feel like it needs to be like a healthy business to me, I feel like is a well-rounded business in the sense that like you don't have all of your eggs in one basket, so to say, like, which kind of is also a purpose of content repurposing, is like not just relying on, for example, your Instagram platform. Like if you've got 20,000 followers on Instagram, that's fabulous. But if you don't have them connected to you in some other kind of way, if something happens to that one platform that you're showing up on, that can be a big hindrance in your business. So I feel like you need to be protecting yourself on all different fronts, however that looks like for you and your business. And then more so from kind of taking a step back, I feel like having a healthy business is also a business that not just supports you like in the, financial goals that you have and the reasons, the tangible reasons, so to say, why we have a business, but also like your personal, like the personal goals that you have and the lifestyle that you have, because that's fabulous if you are hitting these income goals and you're like, killing it in business, so to say. But if it's not actually making you happy, and if you're not actually able to take time off whenever you want to, or whatever the reason was that had you start this business, if that was to be able to spend more time with your kids or to travel or just, have freedom, flexibility, whatever that looks like for you, but it's not, your business isn't letting you do that, I feel like that isn't a healthy business. So that's kind of the two different ways that I feel like healthy businesses are important.
It is. And it's I think it's that kind of intrinsicness, isn't it? You've got to have the lifestyle piece as well as the actual business piece. Yeah, I totally resonate with that. But it's interesting, I think, when we're talking content, is that people can feel the overwhelm, but they can feel like that's a bit of a burden for them as well. So I think that would be a really interesting place to kind of start with, based on what you've just said around we want the flexibility, we want the freedom, we want to have time, we want to be able to choose, yet we know we have to do content. And I feel like there's this kind of struggle with some people where they just feel stuck on how do we create content? How do we create it consistently? And I always talk about consistent is not the same as constant. And I think that's a really important piece as well. But actually the power of repurposing that allows us to revolutionize how we actually create content. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit, because I know you have lots of frameworks and kind of things that you work with people, but tell us a little bit more about you and content repurposing and maybe how you got into it as well.
Yeah, essentially. So when I first started my business, it was 3 years ago, and I started just as kind of like a general virtual assistant. I already had like an admin background. I was working like in my corporate 9-to-5 job. I was an assistant over there. Long story short, wanted to have the freedom to work online, wanted to move over here to Europe. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this virtual assistant thing. And when I started my business, I quickly realized, okay, you obviously need to market yourself. How am I going to market myself? I need to create content. And I quickly had to like shift my framework into like in my mindset to be, okay, I'm also a business, like I'm now a business owner, but I'm also in a sense, I'm now a content creator. Like I have to create content for myself. And while I was, finding clients and people were reaching out to me, the main thing that they were reaching out for wasn't necessarily the admin help. It was they needed help with all of their content. Like they had a podcast and they would need help, putting the podcast onto social media, onto email, putting it onto these different platforms. And back then I noticed that like repurposing definitely wasn't talked about as much. I feel like nowadays it's definitely gotten to be more common of a framework and a strategy that's being used. But back then when I was starting 3 years ago, I feel like it just wasn't, or maybe I wasn't in the right spaces of the online world yet. I don't know, but I quickly realized that with the different clients I was working with, I recognized, okay, so I'm taking this blog post that they wrote and I'm making an email newsletter out of it. I'm making social media posts out of it, or I'm taking this podcast episode and, I'm making video from it. I'm editing it into YouTube. And so it was like a year into doing that, I realized like, okay, this is a thing. Not too many people are doing it. This is saving my client so much time. And then it's saving me time as well as a service provider. Like all of the information is already there for them, for me. And I found that it was a more kind of like authentic form of content creation, because I feel like kind of maybe why a lot of business owners are afraid to outsource is because they're like, okay, well, how is someone going to capture like what's in my head? How are they going to get into my head and then know how to create from there? But with repurposing, the framework, everything that you said, all of your ideas, your vision, your voice, everything is right there. It just needs to get repurposed, magicked up into, the different platforms. And so once that light bulb kind of ticked for me was when I was like, okay, full force, repurposing content. It's what I do. And I've been, doing that now ever since.
Amazing. And it helps, I guess, with what you were talking about right at the beginning of, it gives you that time back. It gives you that flexibility. You just create one piece of content and you can use it in so many different ways. And I think when we start looking at how we can optimize the content that we're already creating, you're not creating anything new. And I think a lot of it, in some ways, I think because we live in such a knee-jerk reaction society, there is this constant need to be on and constant need to be, or assumption that we need to be on, assumption that we need to be present all the time. That then takes us down that route of, I need to keep creating more and more content. Whereas if we actually reverse engineer it from a business owner strategic perspective, then we can kind of go, actually, what do we want to put out to our audience? How do we make this as simple and as easy as possible? And this is where I come from. Make it simple, make it easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. That's what gives you the time back, but it does require a little bit of organization, I guess. Beforehand to kind of really think about where and how and all the rest of it that you want to show up.
Yeah, 100%. Like how I like to explain it is it's just a way for you to be able to work smarter, not harder. Like you already took the time and energy to create that one piece of content. Like let that work for you. Let that do its job. Like the energy that you put into that was well used. So let it grow from there, essentially.
So I know if people are listening to this, they'll be like, okay, so what's the best way for me to do this? Like, do I start with like recording a video or a podcast and then repurposing that into different content? Or do I write a blog first and do it? Like, does it tend to be the longer copy, whether that's audio, video, or written, to then make that shorter? Is that how you would kind of do it from a process perspective?
I definitely have found that that's easier for me, but I really think it depends on whatever the individual person's like favorite piece of content to make is. I find that a lot easier to repurpose from, because when you are repurposing, like you are, like you're going back, reviewing what you've said, and like that just is not fun to do if you're doing that with a piece of content where you were like, I didn't really like making this in the first place. So why am I going to sit here and spend my time repurposing this? Like if you are someone who doesn't really enjoy making Instagram posts, but you really like writing blog posts or you like writing emails, then start with repurposing from those. Or I also know that there's a lot of business owners who really don't like writing emails. That can be a big mindset block for a lot of business owners. And so don't try to be repurposing the emails that you really didn't enjoy writing, but From more of like a strategy workflow perspective, I do feel like starting with the longer form piece can be easier because you already have pretty much all of that framework there for you. So that's why I think like podcasts and videos are great to work from, because I also think that like when you are in the flow of speaking, so many different things just like naturally come out that might not have come out if you were writing. And so it's just a more natural flow of how I think our brain then comes out with what's coming out from our words. And so I feel like repurposing from there, you'll find a lot of different gems that maybe you wouldn't have found if you were repurposing from short form. But it's definitely still possible to repurpose from short form. Like I do that with my social media posts, like carousels that I have. If there was just like a short carousel, I was like, okay, I've just got like 3 short tips that I want to, give something here. Maybe like I'll come back to that in like a month when I'm like, going through my content and I'm like, oh, okay, I actually have new ideas I could add to this. I could go ahead and make this a blog post, or I could go ahead and talk about this on the podcast. So I feel like it kind of just depends on if you are someone who wants to, how I call it, like repurpose content in the moment when you're creating, or if you more so are someone who like wants to go back, you like have a workflow or, a system to where you're like auditing your content and you're like, okay, this performed really good, I'll repurpose from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I love that you said that, create from a place that is energetically good for you, because and I think that's when people always show up in their best possible way, isn't it? And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to attract your ideal client to you. So you want to be in that space where energetically you are communicating in the best possible way and then repurposing from there. That's such a useful tip, I think, for people to remember, is that there isn't a right way. It's the right way is the way that feels energetically good for you. And I think you mentioned it there. So let's delve into that a little bit around kind of analyzing content. And, there's on one side, you can be so organized and you can have your strategy and you know exactly what you should be putting out or what you want to put out. But there is also this other side of actually being quite analytical, like what is your audience actually resonating with? And how can we create more of that? How do you find that kind of balance? Or how often do you tend to do a sort of a analytical audit of content?
Yeah, so I look back through my content. I do it quarterly, to where I do kind of like an audit on my content. I'll go through and more so kind of reflect on, because I have everything I think about is from a repurposing standpoint. And so I kind of like go through and I start with my Instagram feed is kind of where like the main of everything falls through, because that's typically the platform where I'm purposing everything on. If I've got, my podcast, I'm repurposing everything from the podcast onto there. I'm repurposing emails onto there. So that's kind of just where like everything, that's the middle point. That's where everything is landing. And so I mostly kind of go through from there and analyze and go, okay, how did this post do? Okay, here's a carousel that I shared. Is there anything I've learned since then to where I could either repurpose this and do a new post? I have something else I want to add on to it. And also I think it's important to definitely pay attention to the metrics, but also look at the meaning behind them. Because, for example, if maybe you had a post, you really liked it, it only got like 5 likes or something, but you had someone you had an inquiry to your website, or, you had something pop up in a different place, then I personally feel like that in that sense, like the likes and comments that's okay. That piece of content served a different purpose. Same with emails or same with podcast episodes, like whatever metric you are looking for. Like I always think it's important to look at the meaning behind the numbers, and kind of just like, I feel like everything in business, like let's say you took 2 weeks off, your numbers went down, but in those 2 weeks off, you got to have a vacation with your family that you wouldn't have been able to do if you wouldn't have had your business, if you were working in corporate or anything like that. And so that's where I kind of have a different mindset versus I feel like maybe what some other marketers out there might have, to where I do think analytics and looking at that is important, because especially if you notice that, okay, the posts that I'm doing that are getting the most likes, that are getting the most engagement, if you straight up really do not enjoy making those and it takes you so much energy to do it, is there a different way that you could put that content out there? You know, there's so many different ways that you can think about it. And so I think when you are going through and, you know, auditing, analyzing, just have a open mind and think about things from a broader perspective versus, okay, this post only had 5 likes. That means it wasn't a good post, you know, like what else did this do for you?
And I think I love this. And I think it's very much aligned to how I teach as well, in the sense of like success means something different to everybody. And it isn't just about the financial targets. It isn't just about the number of likes and engagement. It is that next piece, isn't it? It's the, you know, the meaning of it. And I think, again, it also depends on which industry you're in, because there are some people who, or some industries where you were never ever going to get high likes and engagements because the content that you're posting, especially if it's a bit of a mirror reflective post and you're calling people out, you're going to get messages. People aren't going to want to admit to certain things in a social media world or in a public forum. But if they've been called to that post and that's really resonated with them, they might well message you or send you an email or something like that. And for me, as you said earlier, that is the real connection piece that we're trying to get to, especially when we're looking at it from a pure business perspective. We're putting content out there to have a relationship with our audience, to give value, but we are also a business and we want to make sales as well. So I think it's that balance, isn't it, of just, what are the real metrics that you're wanting from this? Is it just about the vanity likes and comments and stuff, or is it actually the driving force of a business?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why you have to kind of be really careful about the trends that you're jumping onto that are popping up online. Because if you know, I'll use my niche, for example. So if I'm, you know, talking about content repurposing online, and then I notice that there is a trending sound and it's about, you know, motivation, or it's about your favorite books or something. And like, you are like, okay, I'm going to do a reel based on this. You get like, you know, reel goes viral. You get all these new followers, you get all these likes. Immediately, your brain's going to be like, oh my gosh, that was great. That was a success. Now I've got 1,000 new followers. But if they have nothing to do with your business, your niche, they're not going to buy from you whatsoever, then those 1,000 followers, literally, like, it doesn't mean anything, you know? And so that's why I think like doing fun posts like that are definitely a lot of fun. But it kind of, to what you were saying as well, like I was working with my hairstylist actually a couple of years ago, and she, like, her main goal, she was like, I really want to have like 50,000 followers on Instagram. I'm like, okay, that's your goal. That's great. But you are living in a small town. If you have 50,000 followers and they all live in California, they don't live in Kentucky, you are a hairstylist. You're getting your business from clients who are coming in and getting a service from you. And so I think that's where it's have to have, you have to define what success means for you, essentially, like you were saying.
It's so important. And it's such a useful reminder, because I think it's so easy, isn't it? You can look at your competitors, or who you think are your competitors, and you have that, you know, follower target that we're aiming for. But actually, the reality is that, who are your clients? Where are they based? Like, what does your business need? What does it look like? Who are you serving? Those are the people that you want to get to. And sometimes actually a smaller following can be much better for you, because more of them are going to see them than a larger following where they're not related to you and they're in a completely different location. So the algorithm plays funny games and they're not going to show it to the people you want it to. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's why I like to look at numbers, but that's why I try not to look too much. That's why I have found like quarterly has been a good balance for me to be able to play with.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So if someone is kind of in this overwhelmed state at the moment, they know they need to do maybe some longer copy stuff, or, you know, videos and things like that. From how far do you repurpose, I guess, is kind of where I wanted to go to next, really. If they're, you know, I come from a place of, actually, you don't need to be on every single platform. It's about being targeted. It's about being strategic on it. Consistency versus constancy. How do you manage that? Because if you are repurposing, obviously you can push that out in so many different places. I feel like I know what you're going to say with this, but I'd love to kind of hear it, because I think it's a useful conversation for people to hear, in the sense of, it feels like a lot of pressure for people to be like, oh, I've heard about this new platform, or I feel like I should be on this one, or I only work in a couple of spaces. Is that wrong? So yeah, I'd love your take on this, as to, how far wide, how many platforms should we be in, and all that kind of stuff when it comes to
Yes,
content.
yeah, I definitely agree with where you're getting at, because I think, I mean, and sort of to what I was saying kind of at the beginning is, I definitely don't think it's healthy to be on every single platform. If you don't want to, if your audience isn't on there, then you're just putting your energy in places to where it doesn't need to be. However, I do think it's important to be somewhere other than just one platform. You should have two different avenues to where people can find you, to where like one's a backup, so to say. So that's why typically it's like social media. And then I always recommend like an email list, or some kind of platform where you have more control over than, if someone were to hack it or some awful thing were to happen. So that's why usually, like, if you have a podcast, you have an email list, an area where you're more directly able to be communicating. And so like, I can use myself for example here. So like, I've been, my main platforms have been Instagram, my email list, and then really just this year, I've been like, okay, let's venture out into other places. And so I've now started repurposing onto YouTube and onto Pinterest. And essentially what I'm doing there is like my carousel posts, I'm repurposing those into like reel style videos. And then the reels that I have, those are just straight up getting uploaded onto YouTube and onto Pinterest as their short form videos. And really, I mean, I'm not creating new content for those platforms. But man, it does take a lot of time to get all that stuff uploaded. Like, even it seems the idea was really great at the beginning when I was like, okay, let's start to go onto new places. Let's go onto YouTube. Let's go onto Pinterest. Like, oh, you just need to get it uploaded. And like, here I am, Anna, you're the repurposer. Like it's not as simple as just uploading. Like there's more different things that go behind it. And like, for an example of like, if you have your captions that all say, okay, go to my link in bio to book a discovery call with me. There's not a link in bio on YouTube, not a link in bio necessarily on Pinterest to where people are going to. Like, you need to change your verbiage, so to say, in all these different places. And so I think I'm glad that this isn't something that I did at the very beginning, because it totally would have turned myself off to this. I think you definitely need to find your footing first, and the platform that feels really good for you, feel really settled in that place, have a community there. And then when you're picking where to go next, I would pick somewhere that is similar and feels like kind of scary, so to say, but manageable still, to where it's like, okay, this feels a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I think I can handle it. And I mean, and we're business owners. We thought that when we wanted to start a business.
We're all risk takers, aren't we?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it. And so I would say move on to one platform at a time. I'm also gonna call out Threads here a little bit, just because you see everyone else getting onto one platform that's a new platform, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to.
Oh my goodness, I've had a recent podcast that's got out as to, I can't remember how many, I think it was 6 reasons as to why I haven't joined Threads.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, there's so many things. You don't have to be in these new places. And if it's going to be a distract, I mean, there's so many different reasons.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm all for that. If it doesn't, I'm also not on Threads. I just straight up would not have the time to be on there. But also, like, if your people aren't hanging out on there, then it doesn't make sense for you to be on there, unless like, you have your own, you want to have a personal account or something that's not related to your business. But yeah, I mean, determining what platforms to go on, you can do it really intuitively, or you can take it a little bit further. And I think that kind of just depends on how you choose to make decisions in your business and what you feel like's worked for you.
Yeah. And I think you're so right in saying, actually, create the platform, or not create the platform, but get a footing on a platform and then build and scale from there, rather than trying to be too scattergun to start with, because it'll feel easier and you can kind of test things. As you say, you've got your community, you've built that up, you can repurpose. I think email list is so important to have, because it's, you own it, whereas the social media platforms we don't own. So I think it's really important to have that. It's still the number one way of communication within adults. So I think it still really has a valid place to be there. And you can cross-purpose between the two, which is what I love. But yeah, having one social media platform and an email list, I think, are probably the two most important. And then, as you say, just build up from there, like test and see which feels good for you, maybe explore where else your audience is hanging out. But yeah, you don't have to be everywhere. This is music to my ears.
Yes.
And hopefully music to everyone else's ears, where they're like, oh my goodness, I've been told for so long that I need to be everywhere. And you really don't. You can build such a successful business by being really intentional with where you're spending your time and your energy and your resources. And I think content's just a big part of that as well. We know we have to create content as a business owner. We have to do that. We are all marketeers, as much as we don't necessarily want to relate to that. But actually, if we can make it easier for ourselves through repurposing, through all the stuff that we've talked about, it just makes complete sense to do that. What are your sort of go-tos? Do you have kind of scheduling to make it easier, or do you tend to kind of create on the hop and then push that out there? Like, how do you make things even simpler for yourself?
Yeah, that's where I've noticed that for me, like doing things like, as I've said, kind of like 3 months at a time is easiest for me. So that's where I'll go through, do the system that I have to go back, do a review, see if there's anything I've shared in the past 3 months that I want to repurpose. That's when I'm now going in and getting things scheduled and repurposing onto the different platforms that I'm now showing up on. But in terms of like the main, I guess I'll call it like pillar content that I'm creating, like the piece that I'm starting with, I'm really repurposing from there. In the moment, I'll repurpose like one piece from it. So like I'm kind of starting mostly from podcast episodes that I'm doing, and then I will repurpose from there. I'll go ahead and do an email about the episode, get that repurposed. And then, because most of my social media content, I am creating like in the moment of ideas that kind of just come from me. So I've just over time created kind of like a content bank of like things that I have shared that I can kind of just post whenever I feel like it. Like I aim to try to post, like 3 times a week. I don't know in my head what exact 3 posts I'm going to post this week, but I've got that bank that I can go to be like, okay, what 3 posts do I feel like sharing this week? And so that's where, with things like my podcast and with these longer pieces of content that I'm repurposing from, it's easier for me to do that like kind of bulk of repurposing once I'm at like that 3-month mark, for example, to where I'm like weaning down from my content bank. I'm like, okay, let's go back through, push some more things out, because I also like doing it that way because I feel like it gives a refresher to my audience as well. So like I've had that podcast episode go out about the topic, I've emailed about the topic, but I haven't really talked about it since then. So now would be a great chance for me to get that repurposed, get that onto my social media, get that onto Instagram, talk about it there, give a refresher to go back to the podcast episode and listen to it for more tips. And also kind of just like a different piece is, if we aren't talking about things frequently, if we don't even remember that we talked about something 3 months ago on the podcast or 3 months ago on our social media platform, then our audience definitely does not remember, definitely doesn't know what we shared. And if it was something that was really good and juicy, then definitely say it again. Yeah. And so that's also why I kind of work in these different like quarterly batches, is because I think it gives a good chance to be able to refresh ourselves, to refresh our audience, and to just get all of that recycled back out there.
So powerful. Oh, I love that. And I think having that content bank is something that reduces overwhelm as well, doesn't it? It's just oh, what am I going to post today? Or what am I wanting to focus on? Of course, if you're launching or things, you're going to have a bit more of a strategic piece to this. But actually, if it's just the everyday pieces, I think it's having that content bank of ideas or stuff that has worked previously as you say, people can't remember what we said last week, let alone 3 months ago. And actually, from a pure marketing messaging perspective, you will only be standing for 3 or 4 different things. That's what you want to be known for. And so actually your messaging should be repeated in different ways, because that's how people are going to build that connection with you. They're going to build that relationship. They're going to know what you do and how you help them. So yeah, I think people sometimes try and overcomplicate it because they're like, oh, well, I posted that, I can't post that again. And it's like, well, you can do, but let's look at how we could refresh it. Or maybe things have changed in the external world and you want to tweak it slightly. And yeah, there's so many different ways that you can repurpose, I think, aren't there? Rather than literally just taking chunks and blocking it through.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I feel like that's also kind of something that I see holds business owners back from repurposing, is because they almost don't want to talk about those same few things over and over. They're like, oh, people are going to get tired of hearing me talk about this. I talked about this 2 weeks ago. Why should I talk about it again? But you absolutely have to talk about it again, because that's, like you were saying, that's how people are going to know who you are, what you do, what your niche is. They're going to learn about your offers. And so that's why I think, also people are scrolling through and seeing so many different people's on their news feed. They're listening to so many different podcasts. They're subscribed to so many different emails that it's going to take them a while before they truly do grasp, this is this person and this is what they do, and this is why I should go to them to do that. And so that's why I feel like repurposing is just another way to get that message reiterated and get that out there.
It's just embedding that message in people's brains, isn't it? Of going,
yes.
Okay, this is where I go. And I think people also, they can take different message or take the same message, but if they're whatever's going on in their personal lives or if they're busy, they're going to take that with a different lens. So things will land in different ways for people, even if you literally just said that, a few weeks ago, and they'll be like, oh, I get this now. And just from whatever's going on with there, which is the bit that we obviously can't control. So yeah, don't be afraid to continue to put out similar messages, because I think, as you say, that's exactly what we should be doing and we need to be doing, and people don't do enough of. So yeah. Oh, so many amazing tips. I think we can kind of chat for hours on this. Where can people find you? So if they're going, oh my goodness, this sounds really juicy. You obviously share a lot of content on and tips on your Instagram and your podcast. Tell us a little bit more about those and where people can find you and listen in a little bit more.
Yeah, so my Instagram, that is Anna Schild VA. I'm pretty sure all of my platforms are that. And then my podcast is the Content and Chill podcast. So I'm really talking all things content on there. I have my website as well. That's also Anna Schild VA. And then something you can download on there. I have a checklist. It's like a 4 or 5 different page PDF checklist. That's exactly, if you have a podcast, here's different things to repurpose directly from that podcast that you can make from. Here's what to repurpose from a video, from a blog post, from these different pieces, because I feel like it's a lot. It's one thing to hear about it. It's another thing to see it and be like, okay, I can take this message and make this into a reel, So if you are getting started into repurposing, I would definitely recommend going and having that to guide you through as well. And I have so many different resources on my Instagram as well. So maybe that'll be able to give you some different ideas to go through.
Amazing. And we'll make sure that all your links are in the show notes as well, so people can just click straight into it. I've loved chatting to you. I think it's such a useful conversation to remind people that actually it doesn't have to be hard, and we can make our lives so much easier when it comes to content creation. And I think there's almost that reframe that content creation is actually, it's just lead generation. It's free lead generation. If you're creating that content anyway, let's make it work harder for us and let's help it grow so that you don't feel like you're in this constant state of creating new content. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing all your words of wisdom.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, like I said, I'm here to spread all the magic of content repurposing. I want everyone to know it does not have to be difficult. You can create content. It can be fun. It can be easy. So that's what I'm here for. So thanks for letting me share that message.
Oh, Anna, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me on the Healthy Business Podcast. And if there's anyone listening to this and think that, you've got a friend or a colleague that would benefit from this as well, feel free to send them the link. We would love to have a review as well, just so that we're making sure that we are providing the right content for you guys to listen to as well. So I will see you on the next podcast episode. I'm Sarah Cook, and Anna Schild, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.